Greetings people, this is 480 Volts, and welcome back to another episode of 480 Reviews. Woo-wee! It has been a long time, hasn't it? Let's just say that this review took me a lot longer than I'd anticipated to make, but, anyway, here we go. Today we are going to be talking about one of my very favorite games of all time, Final Fantasy VI. This is the first game in the Final Fantasy series that I ever played, as well as the very first RPG that I ever played. See, when I was younger, I was never really interested in the concept of RPGs. I figured it was all just boring, repetitive, monotonous, spamming battle commands over and over again with nothing to really hold my interest in between battles. Boy, was I wrong. Played this game and then I suddenly realized what I had been missing out in all of these years. But let's just go ahead and get into this game, shall we? Development for Final Fantasy VI began shortly after the release of FF5 and only took a year to make, which I find astounding given that this game on a whole is just bigger in scope than any of the FF titles prior. Interestingly enough, series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi was not as intimately involved in this project due to his work with other projects and the fact that he had recently been promoted to executive vice president of Square. The game was released for the Super Nintendo in 1994 in both Japan and North America. However, because FF2, 3, and 5 had not at the time seen a North American release, and 4 had been released in North America under the title of Final Fantasy II, the North American release for this game was released under the title of Final Fantasy III. Unlike FF4, no significant changes were made to the gameplay or graphics, aside from an outfit change to the Esper Siren, whose original design was a little too bare-butted for American children's eyes. The American release was translated by a guy by the name of Ted Woosley. Woosley made a concerted effort to keep everything as kid-friendly as possible by censoring words like death, dead, or any other profanities. Now, I'm gonna be honest here, Ted's translation kinda sucks sometimes. It's definitely more bearable than FF4's butchered dialogue, but sometimes the length he goes to avoid saying die or dead gets kind of annoying. And then sometimes the dialogue is just so funny and bizarre that it's almost impossible not to love it. Seriously, when you take a foul-mouthed character and try to make them kid-friendly without sounding too obvious, and while trying to keep it interesting and not lazy, you come up with some interesting results. The best example is definitely Kefka. I'm sure everyone is familiar with his infamous one-liners. A fair number of reports and remasters were made as well. A PlayStation port was released in 1999 bundled with FF5 under the title of Final Fantasy Anthology. This version includes some sweet opening and ending FMV cutscenes, as well as a scrapbook unlocked after beating the game, in which you can view bestiaries of the monsters, details of the Espers, a guide to the Colosseum, and some of the artwork from the cutscenes. A few minor tweaks were made to the translation, but it's essentially the basic skeleton of Woosley's translation. In 2006 and 7, a port for the Game Boy Advance was released with a fresh new translation, and in 2014, a remaster was made for Android and iOS devices. For this review, I will be showing footage from the North American SNES release. As before, if you do not want the story spoiled for you, pause the video now and click on the timestamp in the description to skip everything story related. I'll give you a second. And let's do this. The game's story is quite a bit different from the previous FF titles. For the first time besides FF2, Square abandoned many of the classic and somewhat cliched story elements used in prior titles, like the Warriors of Light or the Elemental Crystals. One of the very first differences you will notice immediately is the world's atmosphere and setting. While the previous titles took place in more fantasy fairy tale lands, abundant with castles, dragons, knights, and princesses, this game takes place in a more steampunk-driven era. We've still got castles, dragons, and knights, but no princesses, but we've also got railroad trains, industrial mechanics, and a mountainside village kept warm by geothermal engineering. If you're like me and frown upon fantasy-driven games getting a bit too realistic with their atmosphere, don't worry. There's still enough elements in this game that are totally and completely whimsical, like the Phantom Train, which carries the souls of the dead to the afterlife, and Figaro Castle, which can sink into the sand and travel underground to another continent. I also love how naturally chocobos fit into this world. You'll often see knights casually riding around on chocobos as you might expect them to on horses, as opposed to the previous titles where the chocobo just seems to be this ultra-rare creature that only you, the player, can encounter. Another noticeable difference is that this game features a rather large cast of playable characters, much like FF4, but instead of focusing on simply one, the story focuses on all of them. Or at least it tries to. The developers wanted each character to be the main protagonist, however, I don't think they executed this idea very well. Characters like Terra, Locke, and Celeste tend to take up a lot of story time, while characters like Gao, Mog, and Setzer have almost no impact to the plot, with characters like Edgar, Sabin, and Shadow being somewhere in the middle. Another thing that really bothers me about the story is how many of these characters have amazing potential but end up becoming pieces of cardboard, with only a few of them really being fleshed out. While each character has a default name, you have the option to name them whatever you choose
choose when they are introduced. One thing I really like is how the introduction of each character provides a short little description before their name is brought up. Something else to note, the game allows you to determine who is in your party at whatever time. For the first half of the game, the story pretty much determines who is present during certain key events, sometimes giving you the option to change one or two characters out. Once you get an airship, you can change your party up any way you'd like. You can have as many as 4 characters in a single party, or even as few as 1. Here's how the story goes. Sometime after the birth of the world, the mysterious and powerful force known as magic was birthed into existence by 3 goddesses. These goddesses granted many humans the ability to utilize magic, transforming them into powerful beings called espers. Somewhere along the line, a conflict arose between the 3 goddesses, and they battled each other through the ages. Eventually, the goddesses realized that their conflict was literally destroying the world. Unable to resolve their differences, and unwilling to let the fighting continue, the goddesses turned themselves into stone statues and charged the espers to look after them and protect them. The espers migrated to this area and built a wall around the statues. This area became a dwelling place for espers who vowed never to reawaken the statues lest their fighting resumes and the devastation continues. Meanwhile, the humans slowly begin to rebuild their civilization without the ability to use magic. This became known as the World of Balance. Some 1,000 years after the war, the Gestalian Empire invades the Esper home and begins to forcefully abduct Espers. The Espers react by sealing the gateway so that no one may enter or exit the Esper world, but not before the Imperial soldiers have captured a large number of Espers. These they take back to their research facility and begin to experiment on them in hopes of unlocking the secrets to their magical abilities. Eventually, the Empire develops technology that allows them to use magic to power their machines. This is known as Magitech. The Empire is also able to infuse a certain amount of magic into living human beings. Seeking to build a powerful army of mage knights, Emperor Gestal orders his soldiers to search the world for any espers that may be present. The game begins with you, the player, taking control of 3 Imperial soldiers entering the mountainside village of Narsh, where an esper is rumored to be present. One of the soldiers is a young girl who apparently has magical powers of her own, thus causing the other soldiers to be somewhat intimidated by her and are at ease only for the fact that the girl is wearing a slave crown on her head, which robs her of all conscious thought, making her a mindless drone who simply follows orders. The soldiers invade the village, cut down any resistance they are met with, and venture into the mines where the esper lives, frozen in a block of ice. This esper, which has the appearance of a magnificent 3-headed bird, vaporizes the other 2 soldiers and attempts to form some kind of connection with the girl, which seems to fail, most likely due to the girl's Magitech armor, and the girl is rendered unconscious. She then awakens in the home of an old man named Arvis, who has removed the slave crown from her head, with no memory of her own past or identity save for her name, Terra, or Tina in the original Japanese. The villagers of Narsh surround Arvis's home and demand that he hand over the girl. Arvis tells Terra to escape through the back door and go through the mines. She does so but is pursued. During the chase, she is injured and passes out again. Meanwhile, Arvis sends a young man named Locke to find her and take her safely to the Imperial Castle of Figaro. After Terra and Locke make it safely to Figaro and meet the young King Edgar, a squadron of Imperial soldiers led by a Magitech knight named Kefka arrives and demands that Edgar hand over the girl. Edgar denies having any idea of what they're talking about, while Locke informs Terra that he, Arvis, and all of Figaro Castle, including King Edgar, are secretly working for a rebellion against the Empire known as the Returners, because as we all know, you can't have an evil empire without a righteous rebellion. Kefka attacks the castle, which sinks safely into the desert sand while Terra, Locke, and Edgar flee to safety. During their escape, Terra reveals her ability to use magic. Although this feels perfectly natural to her, it absolutely astounds the boys, who then reason that the Empire is chasing her for her powers. They then conclude that her powers could benefit the Returners, and they take her to their secret hideout in the mountains. During their travels, they are joined by Edgar's brother Sabin. Upon arriving at the Returners' hideout, the leader, a man named Bannon, theorizes that if Terra can form some kind of connection with the frozen Esper in Narsh, perhaps they can use its magic as a weapon. Terra agrees. The Returners receive word that Imperial forces have conquered the town of South Figaro and are on their way here. Terra and the others head for Narsh, while Locke goes to South Figaro and attempts to slow the Empire down, where he meets up with a young woman who is a former Imperial general named Celeste, who has apparently defected from the Empire. Locke promises to protect her, and the two escape towards Narsh. As Terra and the others head for Narsh, Sabin is separated from the group and meets a mysterious ninja named Shadow, who briefly helps him before departing, a strange little boy named Gal, who has apparently been living among animals his entire life, and Sir Cyan, the protector of the throne of the Kingdom of Doma, which has apparently been aiding the Returners. All 3 parties converge at Narsh. After fending off Imperial forces led by Kefka, Terra attempts to communicate with the Esper, which once again tries to establish a connection. This time, however, Terra morphs into a strange Esper-like creature, goes berserk, and flies away. The team locates her in the small rundown town of Zozo, where she has been summoned by the Esper Rama, who informs the team that when an Esper dies, its soul is left behind in the form of a small crystal-like stone known as magicite, and that the only way to successfully extract magic from an Esper is by taking it from magicite. Rama theorizes that the Espers captured by the Empire reside in the Imperial Magitech Center and suggests that their souls may revive Terra. He then lets himself die and allows the team to use his own magicite to aid them in their quest. The team then sets off to the Imperial city of Vector by way of an airship belonging to a gambler named Setzer. In the Magitech facility, they rescue several Espers who have been imprisoned for years. These Espers, at the end of their strength, allow themselves to die so that the team can use their magicite. The team then meets Professor Sid, the director of the Magitech research team, who apparently had no idea that the only way to extract magic from an Esper was to kill it, as most of the actual experimentation was being done by Kefka behind Sid's back. Kefka then appears with some Magitech knights and tells the team that Celeste was planted by the Empire to locate and destroy the Returners. Celeste denies this and uses her powers to teleport herself and Kefka away from the team. Sid helps the team to escape while he goes to take this new information directly to the Emperor himself. The team arrives in Zozo and Terra is revived and awakened in her human form by one of the souls of an Esper who is revealed to be her father. Terra now recalls that she was born in the Esper world by a human girl, making her the hybrid of an Esper and a human, but was taken to the Imperial city of Vector when the Empire invaded the Esper world. Back at Narsh, Bannon and Arvis decide that the only way to win the war is to make contact with the Espers in the Esper world and ask for their help. Terra agrees to lead this campaign as her own existence is proof that Espers and humans can work with each other. Terra and her friends make their way to the sealed gate. Terra entreats the Espers to respond to her. The gate opens and an army of Espers swarm out and proceed to destroy everything they touch. A rockfall then piles up in front of the gate, blocking the entrance. Terra and her friends flee back to the airship, which is then damaged by Espers and forced to make a crash landing on the Imperial continent. The team returns to Vector only to find that the city has been completely decimated. They are then summoned by the Emperor himself, who announces that he wishes to end the fighting. He claims to have known nothing about the Espers being killed in the Magitech lab until Sid informed him. Moreover, he believes that the Espers attacked Vector to avenge their brothers and sisters who were killed in the lab, and entreats Terra to locate the Espers and formally apologize to them on behalf of the Empire. Terra agrees. Locke decides to accompany her, and they join an Imperial unit led by General Leo, who has also recruited Shadow and Celeste, and set off in search of the Espers. The team enters a small island village called Thamasa, the inhabitants of which are descendants from ancient mage warriors and thus had the ability to use magic. They are aided by two locals, an old man named Strago and his granddaughter Realm. Shadow leaves the party and they come to a cave where a trio of altars have been built as a tribute to the goddesses of magic. These altars give off a strong magical aura that fills the island. Further in, they meet the Espers, who are quite calm and peaceful. Recognizing the spirit of Terra's father, they explain that they had been waiting from within the sealed gate for years but were unable to open it. Once Terra called out to them and the gate was open, they entered the human world to search for their brothers and sisters but lost control of themselves and their powers, much like Terra did when she confronted the frozen Esper in Narsh. After decimating Vector quite unintentionally, the Espers found themselves drawn to this island and were pacified by its magical properties. The team then returns to Thamasa, where General Leo formally apologizes on behalf of the Empire. The Espers in return apologize for the destruction they have caused. However, a group of Imperial troops led by Kefka enters the village. Kefka reveals that the Emperor was lying the entire time and simply wanted to locate the Espers so they could be killed and their magicite collected. General Leo attempts to stop Kefka but is killed by him. Kefka then proceeds to kill the Espers and take their magicite. The Espers from within the gate burst open the rock pile, blocking the entrance, and attempt to stop Kefka, who effortlessly kills them all. Meanwhile, the returners at Vector have learned of this information and head for Thamasa on the airship, which has now been repaired by Setzer. Kefka and Emperor Gestalt make their way into the Esper world, seeking now to go directly to the source of all magic, the Stone Goddesses. The landmass of the Esper world itself then disconnects from the rest of the continent and rises majestically into the air. The returners use the airship to reach the floating continent and set out to stop the Emperor. The team stands before Gestalt, who attempts to seduce Celeste into joining him. He hands her a sword and tells her to kill her friends, and he will forgive her treachery. She instead stabs Kefka, slightly wounding him. Kefka loses his temper and attempts to revive the Stone Goddesses. The Emperor orders him to stand down, as reviving the goddesses would endanger the very world they are trying to take over. Kefka doesn't seem to care and uses the power of the statues to kill Gestalt. Shadow then appears and tries to slow Kefka down, giving the team a chance to escape. The team then returns to the airship, but Kefka is successful in reviving the goddesses, whose conflict continues, having catastrophic effects on the world. The airship is destroyed and the returners are scattered while the entire world is ripped apart inside and out. 1 year later, Celeste awakens on a cabin on a desert island. The only other person present is Sid, who hasn't seen the rest of the world and cannot confirm that there is anyone left alive. Celeste boards a raft Sid had made in hopes that she would awaken and sails in search of civilization. The world has been completely changed since the events of the floating continent. The landscapes have been drastically altered, the water is dark and murky, and the grass is dry and withered. Even some of the monsters that wander the world are dying. This new setting is known as the World of Ruin. Villages are still populated with people, but the overall tone is different now. There is no trace of the Empire or the Returners. Kefka has since absorbed the power of the goddesses and built a tower from which he surveys the world, destroying random villages on a whim while the people struggle to survive. During her travels, Celeste reunites with Edgar and eventually Setzer, who leads them to a second airship. At this point, you can either enter Kefka's tower, which is dang near suicide with only 3 characters, or explore the world in search of the rest of the team who have all been scattered to different points across the map. Ultimately, the team enters Kefka's tower and defeats the goddesses one by one in hopes that this will render Kefka powerless. It does not, and the team takes up arms against Kefka himself, who has evolved into the god of magic. Upon being defeated, the tower begins to collapse and the pieces of magicite begin to dissolve from existence as Kefka and the goddesses, the only source of viability for magic, have been destroyed. The team escapes in the airship as the world slowly begins to rebuild itself, thus ending the game. For the most part, I love how this story flows. My main complaints are that every sense of climax that was building up during the struggle of power between the Empire and the Rebellion is completely obliterated once the World of Ruin begins. There's no Empire, no Rebellion, no Espers, nothing. It's just kill Kefka before he can cause more death and destruction. It actually feels like a different game altogether. Also, very little of the main story takes place during the World of Ruin. Most of it is made up of side quests, and quite a few of them at that. That being said, there are many things about the World of Ruin that I love. I love how the map is completely changed. I love how most of the villages look mainly the same, but the grass looks withered. I love how some of the earliest monsters you fight are leaking HP as they are simply unable to survive in such a desolate world. In fact, some of them will die before you can even make a move. I love how the village of Narsh is almost completely deserted, making it a ghost town. And although I frown upon side quests being shoehorned in to add game time, many of them are enjoyable and net you some wonderful rewards. I would also advise collecting all characters before entering the final area. During the World of Balance, you can meet a strange old man who seems to have some kind of fetish for combat and fighting, and everything is just too peaceful for him. Then, during the World of Ruin, this same man has built a coliseum in which warriors can battle monsters in exchange for prizes. While everyone else is struggling to make it through the day, this coliseum is thriving. The ending is nothing special. Most of it consists of the team working to escape the collapsing tower. Then the airship flies around a little bit, showing different villages slowly rebuilding. Basically, life will go on, although things will not quite be the same as they were before. Now let's talk about playable characters. As before mentioned, the story was intended to focus on each character equally, whether or not that was truly achieved. So it could be argued that this game does not have a singular protagonist. However, if one must be chosen, I think the obvious choice would be Terra. During the World of Balance, she is definitely the most pivotal to the plot, despite being completely optional during the World of Ruin. She's also the first character you recruit, so yeah. Square-Enix has even, in not so many words, acknowledged her as the main protagonist by selecting her to represent FF6 in the Dissidia games. So let's just go ahead and call her the main protagonist of this game. 18 years before the game began, a young human woman named Madeline, or Madonna in Woosley's translation, really Ted? Madonna? Wanders into the Esper world quite by accident. The locals are unwelcoming at first, as it has been told throughout the ages that humans and Espers cannot coexist with each other, but one Esper named Malden takes care of her and nurses her back to health. Eventually, the two fall in love and give birth to a baby girl whom they name Terra. 2 years later, when the Emperor invades the Esper world, Malden, Madeline, and little Terra are taken into custody, along with several other Espers. The Emperor is fascinated by the idea of a child being born of a human and an Esper, and immediately takes Terra to the capital in hopes of turning her into some kind of biological weapon. Terra spends the next several years of her life as an Imperial citizen until she is old enough to be drafted as a soldier. After the Narsh incident, she has no memory of who she is, where she comes from, or how she is able to use magic so effortlessly. As I mentioned in FF5, I really don't like the idea of amnesia being used as a form of character development, mainly for the simple fact that it is overused as all get out, but whatever. I'm also not a huge fan of moody protagonists, and Terra is definitely that. But I will forgive it in her case, as she actually has some good reasons to be Little Miss Sad Eyes. She doesn't remember anything, but apparently she's responsible for killing people in Narsh. She's also torn between her loyalty to the Empire she doesn't remember serving and the Returners who seem to be good people. And most of all, once it becomes clear to her that she's the oddball for being able to use magic, she sees herself as some kind of biological freak of nature. Even Celeste, who was genetically altered to be able to use magic, seems more human than Terra. Personality-wise, Terra is very gentle, quiet, and always a little unsure of herself despite having a somewhat strong resolve to do what's right. It's obvious Square was going for the flawed hero who doesn't have everything together because can't we all relate, and for the most part I think they pulled it off quite well. One thing that always slightly annoys me is her constant whining that she's afraid she'll never be able to love someone. Seriously, what does that have to do with being able to use magic? Look, if I discovered I was the product of a human and an Esper, I think I'd have some different concerns, like, how do I learn to use this power responsibly and control it? But she seems to be hung up on this paradox that because she's half human, half Esper, she can't love someone? Baby girl, your very existence is proof that humans and Espers can love each other despite everyone saying it wasn't possible. Why should you be any different? I suppose I should forgive her because she still is a young girl, and I guess it's natural for her to be thinking about that kind of stuff. All that being said, I love the direction that this arc takes her. When she was whining about wanting to know what love is, I found myself yawning and rolling my eyes because I know how this is going to turn out, right? She's going to meet some handsome Prince Charming who's going to sweep her off her feet and show her what love is. At first I thought Locke, but once Celeste showed up, he seemed to be leaning more towards her. I considered Edgar, but that just didn't feel right. Maybe someone not introduced into the story yet then. Either way, I'm not eagerly anticipating it. Look, call me a heartless wretch, but I really don't care for the overusage of romance in stories. I know it's what's considered popular and it sells, but I just find it cliched. Thankfully, I was dead wrong about this instance. During the World of Ruin, Terra finds herself in the village of Mablis, which has been completely decimated by Kefka. All of the adults have perished, and the only survivors are two love-struck teenagers named Dwayne and Caterin, and a dozen or so orphan little children. Terra does what she can to take care of these kids, although she does not understand why. And when Caterin becomes pregnant, Terra resolves to fight for the future of all living things, adults, children, and those who have not yet been born. She realizes that the bond she has formed with these children is pure love. Now, it may sound simple to you, but if you stop and really think about it, a mother's love for her children is one of the strongest forms of human love that there is on this planet. And while young Terra obviously isn't the biological mother of all these children in Mablis, she has become the only mother they have left. They even call her Mama. It's so sweet. I did not expect a video game to take this route of character development, and I applaud them for it. Those of you who write stories for books, movies, TV shows, or games, learn from this! At the end of the game, when magic and Espers fade from existence, Terra's human half lives on, driven by her love for the children of Mablis, allowing her to continue in the world as a human being. Locke is a thief, treasure hunter. Years ago, he took his girlfriend Rachel into a cave in search of treasure. However, there was an accident and Rachel was injured. She suffered acute amnesia and had no memory of Locke. Her parents blamed Locke for this and told him to stay away from her. Locke did so until a year later when he learned that Imperial forces had attacked his hometown and Rachel was killed. Locke blames himself first and foremost, but he also has a deep hatred for the Empire as one would expect, so it's no surprise he would join the Returners. When he meets Terra, who also has amnesia, he is reminded of Rachel, whom he left, and vows to protect her, possibly hoping to redeem himself. As I mentioned before, once Celeste enters the scene, he finds himself leaning more towards her for some reason. Maybe Celeste looks more like Rachel, I don't know. I find it really odd that he seems to only care about Terra when Celeste is not around. Oh well, aside from that, he really doesn't have much in the way of personality. Celeste is a former Imperial general turned traitor. We really don't know why she left the Empire. Maybe she decided they were too power hungry? Like most Imperial officers, she was genetically engineered to be able to use the power of magic. She's a good example of a character with potential that isn't followed through, or at least not very well. When she first joins, and it's clear that Locke is love-struck with her, Edgar subtly tries to tell her that Locke is dealing with the loss of his beloved, and Celeste basically responds by saying she's a soldier, not some starry-eyed child. You can see they were going for the whole battle-hardened girl meets charming boy who breaks through her heart and makes her fall in love kind of thing, and well, it just doesn't flow naturally for me. She pretty much goes from cold as ice to blushing cheeks overnight. Also, after she first joins, Cyan makes it very clear that he does not trust her, and she tells him not to trust, but to observe for himself and let her own actions be the deciding factor. I like this idea and wish they had done more with it. Sadly, they don't. After that scene, Celeste and Cyan may as well be best friends given how casually they interact with each other. Edgar is the king of Figaro. He took the throne after the death of his father, whom was believed to have been poisoned by the Empire. This is never confirmed, nor is a reason given, but perhaps he had discovered evidence that the Empire was killing Espers or something, and they wanted him out of the picture. Either way, if his death was indeed the fault of the Empire, then this would explain why Edgar helps the Returners. Unlike some of the other characters, Edgar does have one very distinguishing personality trait. He likes the ladies. He doesn't seem to discriminate either. Basically, if you have two X chromosomes, Edgar considers you fair game. He immediately tries to turn on the charm when he first meets Terra, and after exploring the castle, you can learn that he once tried to hit on the High Priestess, whom I would imagine is rather old. There's even a little girl running around the castle who says that Edgar told her he'd marry her when she gets old enough. He even has to stop himself from hitting on Little Realm. Woosley did a good job at keeping things kid-friendly, but yeah, go play the translation of the original Japanese version and you'll see. Unfortunately, Edgar doesn't really have anything in the way of character development. Oh well. Sabin is Edgar's twin brother who has renounced his royal heritage to extract vengeance on the Empire after the death of his father. After noticing that the kingdom officials only seem to be concerned with protocol and which son should take the throne and not seeming to care about his father at all, Sabin left and became a monk under the training of a master named Duncan. There is a line in Woosley's translation which implies that Edgar too was dissatisfied with the way the kingdom was handling the affair and wanted to go with Sabin, but he couldn't bring himself to turn his back on the kingdom. So they flipped a coin which landed on Edgar, who took the throne. There is a scene later on that implies that Edgar actually rigged the coin toss so that he would take the throne either way. When Sabin meets up with Edgar, Locke, and Terra, who are part of the rebellion against the Empire, he joins them. Despite Sabin forsaking his birthright, there appears to be no animosity between the brothers at all. In fact, they both appear to be quite proud of each other. Unfortunately, Sabin proves to have no personality or character development whatsoever. He laughs in the face of danger, and he has a touching reunion scene with Master Duncan, who teaches him one last technique, but that's about it. He's basically a piece of cardboard. Gao is a little boy who has been living among animals his entire life. His mother died in childbirth, and his father went completely insane and threw the baby into a stretch of land known as the Veldt, where monsters of all kinds hang out. How the kid survives is never explained, but since this is a fantasy game, I'm going to assume that he was taken care of and raised by animals. He survived by imitating the hunting and fighting techniques of the monsters on the Veldt, and he was close enough to civilization, the village of Mablis for example, that he learned to communicate with humans. He too has no character development or personality. You can eventually reunite him with his father, who absolutely does not recognize him at all. Gao does not appear to be bothered by this and is just happy knowing that his father is still alive. In the original Japanese, you can tell that Gao got his name from the sound he makes in the wild. Setzer is a wandering gambler and the owner of the airship Blackjack. At first he has no interest in the Returners, nor any animosity towards the Empire, and only helps the Returners because they kinda swindle him into it. Strangely enough, he seems to appreciate this. During the World of Ruin, he resurrects the Falcon, a second airship belonging to his late friend Daryl, to replace the Blackjack which was destroyed during the collapse of the world. He has no real personality quirks, aside from the fact that he loves both airships very much, as they are the only reminders of his friend. He also doesn't have any real character development. Mog is one of the three characters who are completely optional. He is a young Moogle who first appears with an army of Moogles who offer their assistance to Locke, who has just met Terra and is trying to fight off the Narsh guards who want her head on a platter. Then Mog appears sort of beyond the fourth wall at times as an in-game navigator of sorts. After Terra is revived in Zozo, the team can chase down a pickpocketed Narsh who leads them to the mountains. He then captures the unsuspecting Moogle and uses him as a hostage. If the team saves Mog, he will join the party. If the team does not, well, he can still join the party later in the World of Ruin. He seems to be pretty upbeat and energetic, but has no real character development whatsoever. Umaro is the second optional character. He is a Yeti who lives in the mines of Narsh. He can be seen poking out the holes in the mountains a few times during the World of Balance, but is not recruitable until the World of Ruin. Apparently, cute, fluffy little Mog is somehow his boss. Okay, I don't know how that works. Umaru has no personality, no character development, nothing. He is strictly muscle. Gogo is the third optional character. Like in FF5, Gogo is a mimic expert. Like Umaru, Gogo is not recruitable until the World of Ruin. Gogo agrees to help the team because it sounds interesting. Little is known about Gogo. In fact, we don't even know if Gogo is a guy or a girl. Strago is an old man from the village of Thamasa. Like the rest of the locals, he can use magic, specifically blue magic, due to his magical ancestors. His personality reminds me somewhat of Sid from FF4 in that he's energetic and vibrant despite his advanced years, although he's not nearly as brash. Realm is a little girl from Thamasa. Although biologically unrelated to Strago, she has lived with him as his granddaughter for most of her life. She is a talented artist who can paint almost anything and use her magic to bring it to life. She is very energetic, very excitable, and very strong-willed. She mouths off to everyone, especially Strago, although it is very clear that they love each other very much. Realm is definitely the cheerful, happy little girl that has been in almost every FF game since 5. Shadow is a wandering ninja. He appears in various regions of the World of Balance, sometimes helping the team and leaving whenever the heck he wants. No, seriously, sometimes when he's in your party, he'll just up and leave after a battle. I don't have footage of this because it's completely random, but if he's in your party, you might want to save after every battle, if possible. He appears to be completely emotionless, with no interest in the Empire or the Returners, and only helps those who line his pockets. He is rarely ever seen with anyone other than his dog Interceptor, who fights with him in battle. Interestingly enough, during the floating continent, when he hangs back to slow down Kefka while the team escapes, you are given a choice. Jump onto the airship and escape, or wait until the time runs out. If you wait, Shadow will rejoin the team. Then, during the World of Ruin, you can find Shadow unconscious in a cave in the Veldt. The team takes him back to Thamasa, and after getting some rest, he leaves for the Colosseum where you can fight him in battle. Defeat him, and he will join the team as a permanent, non-leaving member. If you do not wait for Shadow, you will instead find an unconscious Realm in the Veld Cave, and Shadow will never be seen again, apparently having died on the floating continent. Shadow's past is explained through a series of dreams you can unlock by going to sleep with him in the party. His real name is Clyde, and he used to be a thief with his best friend Barum. One of their heists went terribly wrong, and Barum was wounded. Clyde attempted to carry him, but this slowed them down. Barum then requested that Clyde kill him right then and there, quickly and painlessly, rather than let him be captured by their pursuers and killed painfully and torturously. Unable to bring himself to kill his best friend, Clyde ran off, leaving Barum to be captured by his pursuers. Can I just say that that is a messed up situation? I don't know how I'd handle it. On one hand, how can you just leave your best friend knowing that he's going to be killed painfully? On the other hand, how can you just kill him yourself? Seriously, that's a choice that no one should ever have to make, and it no doubt haunted Clyde for the rest of his life. Anyway, Clyde eventually came to the village of Thamasa, where he met a girl, fell in love, they had a child, and he tried to make a new life for himself. Somewhere along the line, his wife died. Unable to cope with this pain and the guilt of forsaking his friend, he left the village and became a ninja. He made a constant effort to purge his emotions so that if ever he was to be put in a similar situation, he would not make the same mistake again. It's worthy to note that if the player chooses not to wait for Shadow, when Realm is found in the Veld, she awakens in Thamasa from a dream that shows her in Strago's house realizing that her father has left her. This, plus the unusual fact that Shadow's man-eating killing machine dog seems to love Realm, suggests that she is Shadow's daughter. The only other clue is the fact that Realm comes with an accessory, a piece of jewelry belonging to her mother, which protects her from any insta-kill magic spells which no one else can equip except for Shadow. And I think it's only fair to tell you that when you do choose to wait for Shadow and re-recruit him, during the ending when everyone else is escaping, Shadow, tired of running from his problem, stays behind and lets himself die anyway. Cyan is probably my favorite character of the game. He is the protector of the throne of the Kingdom of Doma. Early on in the game, the Empire attacks Doma, who has been secretly helping the returners. Kefka then poisons the water supply to Doma, killing almost everyone in the castle, including the king, as well as Cyan's wife and son. Cyan joins the returners in hopes to defeat the Empire and avenge those he has lost. While everyone else's backstory takes place in the past, sometime before the game begins, Cyan's unfolds right there before the player's eyes. And even though he fights the good fight and makes new friends and seems okay, he proves to be tortured by the death of his loved ones. This issue appears to be resolved when he meets a young girl who is waiting for her boyfriend, a soldier in the Empire, who is fatally wounded and died without her knowing. Cyan realized that he was like her and was holding on to what was already lost. But then the issue pops up again when a dreadful monster named Rexel almost consumes Cyan, feeding off of his sadness and regret. In other words, it takes Cyan a long time to properly deal with the death of his loved ones, as should be expected. Despite having such a somber backstory, Cyan proves to be quite comical as a character. He's a good deal older than most of the team, except for Strago and possibly Shadow, whose age is not revealed. As FF6 shows the evolution of the timeline going from medieval castles to steampunk, Cyan is almost like the last relic of the good old days. He's quite intimidated by machinery, and his archaic way of speaking certainly makes for some interesting interactions. He not only has a good personality, he has character development, and the only other character besides Terra who feels complete to me. Let's talk about some of the non-main but recurring characters, starting with Professor Cid. Cid started out as the director of the Magitech Research Facility. His reasons for working on this project were probably noble and pure. I would imagine that the Emperor told him that the use of magic would benefit the human race in science and medicine. Once he learns that this project means the death of Espers, he abandons it altogether and attempts to reason with the Empire. Interestingly enough, there is a line which establishes the fact that he is responsible for Kefka, much like his FF5 predecessor was indirectly responsible for some of the crap in that game. Cid has no real noticeable personality, and for the first time in FF history, he has nothing to do with our airship, although there is a scene in which Setzer is frantically trying to repair the Blackjack, and Cid offers to help him, claiming to be an expert on airships. Interestingly enough, when Celeste first wakes up in the cabin with Cid in the World of Ruin, you are given the task of catching fish for Cid, who has spent most of his energies taking care of you, and nursing him back to health. If you succeed, Cid lives. If you fail, he dies. Either way, Celeste leaves the island. You get no rewards or penalties either way, it just comes down to if you want him to live or not. General Leo is one of the highest ranking officers in the Empire next to Kefka and Celeste. He is without a doubt the most honorable soldier of the Empire. He believes in fair fighting, he is against the use of excessive force, he doesn't wish for civilians to be harmed, and he genuinely cares for his men, and he even went so far as to refuse a Magitech infusion, meaning he has no magical powers. He is very much loved by the soldiers who serve under him, and he is even respected by the returners. He's basically a good guy who's on the wrong side. He is killed trying to stop Kefka from murdering Espers and Thamasa. A few more characters that are worth mentioning are Siegfried or Siegfried, a mysterious swordsman who appears at different points of the game. I really don't know what to make of him, and Biggs and Wedge, the two Imperial soldiers who accompany Terra during the Narsh mission. Ironic that a reference to rebel pilots from Star Wars would actually be members of the Empire in this game, although Woosley mistranslated Biggs' name as Vix, and apparently nobody at Square Industries thought to tell him. Anyway, many subsequent FF titles would feature a Biggs and Wedge of some sort. Now let's talk about some of the antagonists, starting with Ultros the Octopus. I love this guy. He's kind of the Gilgamesh of this game in that you fight him several different times in the World of Balance. He holds allegiance to no one, he has no agenda, no ambition that we know of. He literally just doesn't like you. He's a monkey wrench that gets thrown in to switch things up. During the World of Ruin, he can be seen at the Colosseum as, of all things, a receptionist. Emperor Gestahl is what I like to call the face villain of the game. He looks like the villain at first, but events will prove that there is greater evil beyond him. He leads an invasion into the Esper world after discovering evidence that magic still exists, orders his Magitech research operation, and ultimately makes his way into the stone goddesses themselves, all for the purposes of unlocking the power of magic for himself and taking over the world, until he is killed by Kefka, thereby tipping the scales. He's pretty generic as a villain, not very interesting to me. And now for the big bad guy himself, Kefka. Kefka started out as a normal Imperial soldier who eventually worked his way up to the top ranks. When Magitech experimentation first began, he was the very first human to receive a Magitech infusion. He was the guinea pig. Unfortunately, Sid didn't know what he was doing at the time, and Kefka went insane from the experimentation. From that day forward, he developed hatred and bitterness to anything that harbored any kind of joy or happiness, and only took pleasure from death, destruction, and suffering. He's introduced much earlier than most FF villains, as early as a flashback scene in Terra's mind during her escape from Narsh. Given his circus clown-like appearance and his sick, twisted, psychotic nature, it is obvious that he was heavily inspired from DC's classic, iconic villain, the Joker. He starts out as what appears to be the Emperor's lapdog, the barely controllable loose cannon that is deployed to get the dirty work done. Then, in a surprising turn of events, Kefka destroys the Emperor, and then the world, and then builds his tower throne, from which he surveys all civilization, inflicting pain, death, and destruction as he sees fit. At first glance, his reasons for killing the Emperor appear to be completely spontaneous, a result of him losing his temper and going completely ballistic. However, there is a line earlier in the game which implies that he was planning this all along. His personality seems to have two moods. Sometimes he's very comical and cartoony with his over-the-top temper and his infamous one-liners, thanks to Woosley censoring out his constant usage of profanities. And then other times he's nothing but pure heartless evil. When the slave crown is placed on Terra's head, Kefka tests her powers by having her destroy an entire unit of Magitech knights, his own men, and seemingly taking pleasure at their demise. During the Empire's raid on Doma Castle, he poisons the water supply to the castle, killing almost everyone there, including women and children and even Imperial soldiers who were being held in prisoner at Doma. And he takes pleasure in this. When the Emperor orders him to collect Magicite, he doesn't just slaughter Espers, he has fun doing it. And during the World of Ruin, he sits high atop his tower and randomly destroys or damages different villages just because he can. When you enter the village of Zen, it is immediately attacked by Kefka for no apparent reason. He may as well have just woken up that day and said, "I'm bored, I feel like destroying a village today. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, Zen." This kind of uncontrollable, uncontainable evil cannot be allowed to exist. Imagine waking up in the World of Ruin and thinking to yourself, should I go about my life today, or should I hide under a rock in case Kefka feels like destroying me? These type of villains cannot be bought or reasoned with. They don't have demands that can be met or satisfied. They want everyone to die, and they want everyone to suffer while they're doing it. The only way to safely contain these types of monsters is to kill them. Every minute that they are allowed to live is one more person who could potentially die. Like many FF villains, this guy wants to destroy all existence. This trope is extremely overused in RPG villains, especially the FF series, and most of the time it's generic and cliched. That being said, I think this is one of the few games where I actually like it. Kefka's reasons for wanting to destroy everything all stem from his sick, twisted, insane, psychotic mind. When the team confronts him, he reveals that he does not understand the human need to survive or build, knowing that death and decay are inevitable. He finds this compulsion disgusting and feels the need to stamp it out. Another thing I like about him, unlike most FF villains who are destroyed before they reach their end goal, this guy pretty much does everything he wants save for wiping out all existence. He does absorb all magic, he does become as powerful as he can be, and he does inflict pain, suffering, death, and destruction on all the world. Here's where I think the implementation of Kefka was botched. In the World of Balance, he's the perfect villain. He's introduced early enough for us to get to know him, he does enough evil for us to develop a righteous anger towards him, and he pops up enough times to keep us on our toes. Then during the World of Ruin, he just sort of sits on his tower and waits for us to come to him. I hate it when FF villains do this, and he was unfortunately not going to be the last. This is a small thing, however, and I am quite satisfied in calling Kefka my all-time favorite villain of the franchise. And on that note, hello to everyone who clicked on the timestamp in the description. Whoo-wee! That was a lot to cover. Let's shift gears into gameplay. At first, this game handles much like FF4. Each of the different characters are given specific job classes as pre-decided by the story. Locke is a thief, Shadow a ninja, Sabin a monk, Cyan a samurai, etc. The only characters that have any magical abilities by default are Terra and Celeste, who learn a few different spells here and there as they level up, and Strago, who specializes in blue magic, which is handled differently than normal magic. Battles are handled as you would expect, with the ATB system and the row system working as it did in 3 and 5. Something new this time around, you can cycle through each character's turn without defending. You can basically just pass your turn to the next filled AT bar. Doing so does not use up that character's turn, so it's an effective way of keeping certain characters on standby until you're ready for them to do whatever it is you want them to do. If no character's AT bar has been filled, then the turn just comes back to that one character. Something new introduced in this game are pincer and side attacks. We've got the standard normal, preemptive, surprise, and back attacks, but sometimes you might get into battle and the enemies appear on both the right side and the left side while your characters are in the middle. This is a pincer attack. It just means you're surrounded. When this happens, they always have the first moves, you can't run, and I believe you take more damage. Then a side attack is the opposite. Your party appears on the left and right, surrounding your enemies in the middle. Each character has a unique ability that they can perform in battle. Locke can steal, Shadow can throw things, Celeste can dissolve magic with her sword and absorb MP from it, and so on. Some of these are only slightly useful, like stealing or throwing, or Setzer's roulette ability, while others like Edgar and Sabin are completely abusive and game-breaking. The tools command allows Edgar, the king of Figaro Castle, a kingdom known for its cutting-edge technology, to use special weapons against the enemies. The auto crossbow inflicts physical damage on all enemies, the bioblaster poisons all enemies, the noise blaster confuses all enemies, the drill cuts through a single enemy's defense, and the chainsaw inflicts massive damage to or insta-kills a single enemy. The only prerequisite for these tools is that you must acquire them first, either by buying them or by finding them, and you only need to do it once per tool for the whole game. They don't use MP, they are not affected by row, so you may as well just keep Edgar in the back row and never use the fight command. Sabin comes with a blitz command, which requires you to input a sequence of button commands, after which Sabin will perform a special move. He learns blitzes as he levels up, save for his final blitz, Bum Rush, which he learns from Master Duncan. Some of these blitzes are physical, like Pummel, Suplex, and Bum Rush, while others are magic-based, in that they also can be more powerful if Sabin's magic stats have been boosted, yet they do not use any MP. They are also all row independent, so you may as well keep Sabin in the back row and never use the fight command, just like Edgar. The hardest part is successfully inputting the button commands. Cyan's special ability is Sword Tech, which works like a meter. You charge it up to the next number and Cyan will perform a special sword move. Each number represents a different move. There are 8 numbers altogether, and Cyan learns these by leveling up. However, there is a side quest you can undertake with Cyan in the World of Ruin, which rewards him by unlocking all 8 moves right off the bat. These moves are quite powerful, however you have to charge them up in battle, which can take a little time, during which the enemies are free to get their moves on you. For this reason, I typically don't abuse them as much as tools or blitz, and often keep Cyan in the front row for attack power, even though the sword techs are row independent. Gao is definitely the most unique character. He does not have the fight command. Instead, he has the rage command. Selecting rage brings up a list of monsters he has learned the behavior patterns of. Select one and he will mimic the behavior of that monster for the rest of the battle. You will lose all control over him at this point and can only get it back if he is killed and revived. There is a stretch of land called the Veldt, which is symbolized by its unique music on which monsters you have previously encountered frolic. In this region, Gao also has the leap command. Select leap in battle and Gao will leap at those enemies, ending the battle. Then he may pop up a few battles later and rejoin the party, with the enemies he leapt at added to his rage list. If the enemy you rage can use magic, Gao will do so at no MP cost, so that's kinda cool. That being said, I don't much care for Gao and I rarely use him. Something else new in this game, each character has what is known as a desperation attack. Basically, if one of your characters is in critical HP, there is a chance that they can perform a special move that does massive damage to your enemy. Each character has their own unique desperation move. I have no footage of this as it's random and only happens when someone is in the crits. Anyway, variations of this idea would be reused in many games to come in the form of limit breaks or overdrives. All of this is well and good, but once Magicite is introduced into the game, everything changes. A single piece of Magicite contains the soul of a fallen Esper and can be equipped by any player. Doing so will allow that player to earn magic points at the end of battles. Each piece of Magicite has its own set of magic spells, and these magic points will go towards teaching the character wearing the Magicite those spells. For example, the Magicite of Rama, the god of thunder, teaches any character who wears it Bolt 1 and 2, as well as some other spells. Ifrit, the Djinn of Fire, teaches Fire 1 and Fire 2 and some additional spells. Each spell is learned at a specific multiplier that differs depending on the Magicite and the spell. For instance, Rama teaches Bolt 1 at a higher rate than Bolt 2, so characters wearing that Magicite will learn Bolt 1 quicker than Bolt 2. There are many pieces of Magicite throughout the game, each with a variety of spells. It takes a long time to do, but you could theoretically teach every character every single magic spell. And I know what you're thinking, wouldn't some characters have lower magic stats than others? Yes, but some pieces of Magicite come with little stat boosting attributes upon leveling up. If your character levels up wearing this Magicite, their magic power gets boosted. If they level up wearing this Magicite, their attack power gets boosted, and so on. So you could theoretically use Magicite to boost everyone's overall stats to identical levels. I never do this, but it's cool that you have that option. It's worthy to note that Umaro and Gogo cannot equip Magicite, so you can't boost their stats like that. Also, when wearing Magicite, you have the option to summon that particular Esper as you would with a summoner in previous games. You can only do this once in battle for each Esper. I'm gonna be honest, giving everyone equal magic abilities is overkill. You can do it if you want, but there's definitely no need. Almost every time I play this game, I limit magic to a very specific group of people, usually the girls, as they have higher magic stats by default, though Celeste and Terra's physical stats aren't anything to sneeze at, and they make good tanks. If you plan on undertaking every side quest, be sure to have a few characters decked out with good magic, as there is a side quest that involves a tower in which every command is sealed, save for the magic command, so if you don't have some good magic under your belt, you ain't getting very far. That being said, if you plan on making use of the Colosseum, and you totally should, make sure you have a few competent physical fighters who do not know any magic at all. In the Colosseum battles, you do not control your characters. They are given temporary AIs, and there will be times when you need to kill your opponents as quickly as possible and you don't want your character wasting time casting some useless magic spell like Scan or something. Let's talk about weapons and equipment. This is one of my favorite aspects of the game, and honestly it almost makes me wish certain characters like Edgar and Sabin didn't have such abusive abilities. You can get some killer weapons and armor in this game, especially if you make use of the Colosseum. Something to note about weapons that have magical properties, they now have a random chance of casting a magic spell when you attack with them. For example, the Flame Sword can randomly cast Fire 1, the Thunder Sword can randomly cast Bolt 1, and so on. Although it's randomized, it happens pretty reliably and definitely makes magical weapons worth holding onto for a long time. Also, magical-based shields can teach your character certain spells, just like Magicite. The Ice Shield can teach Ice 1 and 2, the Flame Shield can teach Fire 1 and 2, and so on and so forth. The most innovative equipment slot is your accessories or relics in the North American SNES version. Before, accessories were just one extra little boost in speed or defense or whatever. In this game, each character can wear up to 2 accessories, and there are many different kinds which all have their own unique attributes. Earrings increase your magic power, Atlas armlets increase your strength, Hyper Wrists increase vigor, and so on. There are also some accessories that give you some constant buffs like Reflect, Float, Haste, Shell, or Protect. The Gauntlet allows you to grip a sword with both hands, and the Genji Glove lets you hold a weapon in each hand. Some accessories change certain commands, like the Dragoon Boots, which change the Fight command into the Jump command, or the Offering, which changes the Fight command into X-Fight. The only thing that bothers me is that the Sprint Shoes allows your character to auto-dash. I just think it's stupid that you actually have to buy and equip this ability. It's worth noting that in the Anthology version for the PlayStation, you can dash by holding down the circle button, making the sprint shoes completely useless. Tents now restore all HP and MP to the party, and cottages have been removed entirely. A new item is the sleeping bag, which serves as a tent, but for only one character. Potions and high potions seem to replenish a good deal less HP than before, especially high potions. Chocobo stables can be found in villages and on the map. This time you'll pay money to ride chocobos. The final area is pretty fun. You are prompted to form 3 parties with a maximum of 4 characters in each party, meaning you can only take up to 12 of your 14 characters. The 3 groups are deposited at different points of the tower, and you'll be switching back and forth between groups frequently. One group will go so far, and then be blocked, and then another group will have to hit a switch that opens a pathway for the other group, and so on. Ultimately, each group will have to fight one of the 3 goddesses. To me, this is much more enjoyable than simply trudging through a gauntlet of monsters and bosses, although there's certainly enough of that. There is a super boss named Ultima, or Atma in the Woosley's translation, in both the Floating Continent and the final area. In the Floating Continent, the fight is mandatory, but in Kefka's Tower, he's quite optional. He's definitely challenging, but completely fair and nowhere near as luck-based or difficult as Omega or Shinuru from Final Fantasy V. The final boss is divided up into 4 phases that seamlessly transition into each other, made up of powerful monsters, ending with Kefka himself. Before the fight begins, the game prompts you to form your ranks up from a list of all the characters you have brought into the tower. You can form the ranks up however you see fit. When the battle begins, you will start with the first 4 characters you have entered into the ranks. If any of them are KO'd, you can revive them, but if you do not do so by the time that particular phase has been defeated and transitions into the next, those characters will be removed from battle and replaced with the next characters you have set in the ranks. As far as difficulty, the whole overall fight is nothing too challenging, definitely not as hard as Neo X Death or maybe even Zero Miss, just don't get careless. Life 3 is an amazing spell which can almost negate any possibility of losing if you use it. When the gameplay is at its finest, when it truly shines, FF6 is a very fun and rewarding experience. The graphics are quite good. Square finally decided to stop using the same tired old artwork and design they've been using since the beginning and opted for a fresh new look. Landscapes on the world map as well as backgrounds all look very nice to me. In previous FF titles, characters had a separate, more detailed looking sprite during the battle than in the main game. In this game, a character's sprite is the same in battle as it is in-game. The sprites themselves are fairly detailed. I especially love Terra and Cyan sprites. When they hang their heads, they look genuinely sad. I also love the surprised-looking animations for the characters. They're not quite as over-the-top as they were in FF5, but they're still fun. This game plays around a lot with Mode 7 effects, most notably when riding a chocobo or airship. The only problem here is that the map looks completely flat, like it's literally a board game, but this is forgivable. I imagine this was quite revolutionary back in its day. As for the music, oh, where do I even begin? The brilliance of Nobuo Uematsu cannot be overstated. The guy is a freaking genius. There's simply no other way to put it. This soundtrack is unbelievable. First off, every single character has their own theme. Well, okay, Edgar and Sabin technically share a theme, but okay. Terra's theme is essentially the main theme of the game. There are several different versions of it, including the opening credits sequence, which I absolutely adore, and the world map during the World of Balance. It has a very somber feeling to it that sets the tone for the whole game. Locke's theme is so adventurous and heroic and gives me such a John Williams vibe. When Kefka attacks Figaro Castle and Edgar helps Terra and Locke escape, this music plays. On paper this doesn't make sense, but when you actually play the game and hear the music, it totally does. Locke's theme is just much better suited for that kind of action than Edgar's. A slower, more somber and emotional version plays for Locke's old girlfriend Rachel. It's absolutely beautiful and heart-wrenching and further shows the brilliance of Uematsu, who could arrange a song in such a way to sound heroic and adventurous, yet then rearrange the same theme to sound sad and haunting. One theme, 2 completely different feelings. Edgar and Sabin's theme is quite epic and majestic. It constantly plays at Figaro Castle, as well as some other scenes involving one or both of the brothers. And just like Locke's theme, a quieter and more somber version plays during the flashback scenes involving Sabin leaving the kingdom, yet again showing the brilliance of Uematsu. Shadow's theme is not at all what you would expect from a mysterious, emotionless, cunning ninja. It is quite beautiful and haunting. Celeste's theme is an arrangement of a scene during the opera sequence in which the girl Maria longs for her love Draco. It only plays a handful of times and seems to reflect the love between Celeste and Locke. Cyan's theme constantly plays at Doma Castle as well as the key events involving him. It captures a feeling of a lone warrior and a sense of great honor as well as having a touch of sadness to it. I think it perfectly captures Cyan's character. Gao's theme is very soothing and gentle, which is somewhat ironic for the character. I suppose Uematsu wanted to show that this wild creature had a human heart. Setzer's theme is very grand and majestic. It constantly plays inside the airships. I suppose it's meant to symbolize Setzer being free to do whatever he wants and play by no one's rules but his own. A quiet and peaceful version plays at the end of Daryl's tomb before he uncovers the Falcon. Another arrangement of his theme is blasted during the ending as the Falcon flies free in the skies. Strago's theme really only plays in the village of Thamasa. It's pretty bland to me, all things considered. Definitely my least favorite of the character themes. Realm's theme is one of my favorites in the entire franchise. It is so beautiful, so tranquil, and so tender. My only gripe is that it doesn't fit Realm's spunky and sassy character, but is still beautiful beyond words. Mog's theme is a slower version of the Moogle theme from FF5. It has the same cartoony feel. Umaru's theme plays in the cave in which you recruit him. It basically has a Raging Hulk kind of feel. Nothing too special. Gogo's theme also plays in the area in which you unlock him, or her. It has a very slap-happy kind of feel. There are 3 different arrangements of the Empire's theme. The March arrangement, which plays in the Imperial base camp, the soft, somber, and anxious arrangement, which plays in cities occupied by the Empire, and the dark, foreboding arrangement, which plays in the Imperial city of Vector. The theme of the Returners is a catchy little march that I often find myself humming. Kefka's theme has a very cartoony and mischievous feel. It's not foreboding as you would expect from the main villain, but it definitely fits his comical nature. There are 2 standard town themes, one for the World of Balance and one for the World of Ruin. The former sounds so sweet and peaceful while the latter feels more mundane. Narsh's theme is very sleepy and fits the setting, with the village always at night and with snow laying around the mountainside. Zozo's theme kind of has a bluesy feel. Jador's theme sounds very uppity and classy. The theme of the Esper world sounds very haunting and mysterious. The dungeon music is nice. The Magitech lab has a very mechanical feel to it. The Velt has its own theme which plays both in and out of battle. It's got kind of a jungle beat to it and it's quite catchy. There is only one Chocobo theme in this game, but it's quite possibly my favorite in the series. It's very electronic and techno. It's truly a shame that I don't ride Chocobos much in this game. The standard battle music sounds much like it has in previous titles, same for the boss music. The super boss music, which you only hear a few times, is awesome. I also really like the victory fanfare. The two biggest highlights in the soundtrack for me are the entire opera sequence and the final boss music, Dancing Mad, which is made up of 4 separate parts, ending with a fast-paced, frantic arrangement of Kefka's theme. Dancing Mad is my favorite final boss theme of all time. I'm a sucker for pipe organs, even in 16-bit, and this masterpiece is full of it. Also, I think Phase 4 perfectly captures the feeling of, hurry up and kill this guy before he kills us all. The ending theme includes a medley of each character theme and the main theme of the franchise, which is arranged quite cinematically and orchestral. Production-wise, this soundtrack is just perfect. I'm simply blown away by what Uematsu was able to do despite the 16-bit limitations. Hands down my favorite soundtrack from the SNES, possibly in the entire series. To wrap everything up, I am simply nuts about this game, if you couldn't tell already. This is my favorite FF title that I have played, my favorite RPG, and one of my all-time favorite video games, period.
Well, that was Final Fantasy VI, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, well, do all that stuff that shows you like a video or something, I don't know, whatever, and I'll see you all later. Pieces. Oh, and since I know you're all just dying to see this, train suplex!